Yo, come on, stop playing the Scandinavian. It's not a bad defense, but I feel it is just too obvious of an opening, very predictable, and there are just too many gambits and solid lines to refute it. For example, you can watch this video that has popped up in the card above that will show you how to easily punish the Scandinavian, which is why in today's video I want to suggest an improved version of this defense. If you want to learn more, stay tuned. So of course we are having black pieces and white plays e4. Instead of going pawn to d5 right away, you simply go knight c6. This is called the Nimzowitsch defense, one of my favorite defenses of all time. Now there are two popular moves in this position, knight to f3 and pawn to d4. Now trust me, pawn to d4 is the top played move at beginner level and intermediate level, which is what we are looking at first. Now I promise this video will also include some very interesting traps, so don't go away. In this position, I used to play pawn to e5, inviting white to play d5, after which I would play knight e7, then they always play c4, I play knight g6, knight c3, bishop b4, and after bishop d3 for example, I would mess up white's pawn structure on the queen side like this, and fix my pawn structure on the queen side as highlighted, develop my king's knight, castle short, and play pawn to h6. This is one defense that improved my gameplay. But in today's video, we are looking at a different move. So instead of playing pawn to e5, you simply go pawn to d5, ladies and gentlemen, which introduces a whole new variation of the Nimzowitsch defense called the Scandinavian variation. I believe this is better than the Scandinavian defense itself, and you're going to see why. Magnus Carlsen was a fan of this move at some point, and he also played this against Nepal in 2020 in the Carlsen Invitation, I think. We are going to look at what to do if black plays e5, e takes d5 on knight c3. So let's begin with e takes d5 first. Well, against this, you can just take back, and as you can see, the moves that are highlighted in red are big blunders, but people just don't seem to listen. For example, the second most played move, knight c3, played by over 500,000 people, turns out to be a big blunder because that just loses a free pawn right away in the opening stage. See, right now you are attacking the c2 pawn, you want to win the rook after giving a check, so they play bishop d3. Now the whole idea of this little defense, you guys, is simplification. So always remember the word kiss when you're playing this opening. Kiss as in keep it so simple. So you start with bishop f5. You just want to simplify everything and castle long after playing a6. I mean, this is not what I should be showing you guys. Let's look at some more interesting stuff. So you can see knight c3 or pawn to c4 loses a free pawn immediately. That's why most white players play knight to f3 in this position, double defending their d4 pawn. But this is when you can play bishop g4. So you are developing your pieces in a way of attacking, which is very good. And this is why I think this is even better than the Scandinavian defense, because white can't just attack our queen so early like what they do in the Scandinavian defense. E.g., if they play knight c3 in this position, queen h5 is the safest and the main line. But hey, bishop takes f3 is worth trying in rapid blitz and bullet chess as well. See how it goes. You take the knight first, temporarily sacrificing your queen, and you know you're going to take back. The top played move is knight takes c7 check once again, double attacking your king and your rook on a8. So you play king d8 and they're going to take your rook. Well, so far white is doing great according to Stockfish, but here is where everyone blunders. After you play bishop takes c2, everyone, as you can see in the Leech's database, goes bishop f4, which is kind of a mistake. Yeah, they want to rescue their knight, which is on a8. But you can just ignore this and take the free pawn on d4. And in this position again, there's only one correct move that white needs to find in order to maintain his advantage, which is not even in the Leech's database. You can see for yourselves, it is pawn to f3. Nobody plays that because it doesn't look to be human. They all play knight c7, which loses on the spot, because now you go pawn to e5, attacking the dark squared bishop. If bishop takes e5, bishop b4 is checkmate. And this is one important trap to master in the Nimzowitsch defense Scandinavian variation, you guys. So the secret is to give up your rook. That's number one. And number two, you look out for this bishop f4 and knight c7 sequence to punish your opponents like this. Let's go back. Alright. After white plays bishop f4 in an effort to rescue their knight, What if after taking the free pawn on d4, instead of knight c7, white plays rook c1? Well, same story. You can just go pawn to e5 right away. And again, bishop takes e5 is by far the top played move, after which you mate in style. They won't see this checkmate, I promise. I mean, even if white sees bishop d2 for some reason, instead of taking on e5, yeah, that stops your bishop b4 checkmate. But you have other moves to play knight f6. If bishop c3, you go bishop a4, saving your bishop. Let's say bishop takes, pawn takes. Again, knight c7 turns out to be a blunder, you guys, because you have bishop b4 check, which almost wins the game. And after making white lose his right to castle, you can go for the knight. And there's absolutely nothing that white can do to save his knight. You are going to have 4 pieces against 3. So in almost all the variations, you can see that bishop f4 on knight c7 by white doesn't work. Anyways, let's go back. Alright, back to our initial position of the Nimzowitsch defense, Scandinavian variation, exchange variation. We're still looking at the knight to f3 line, where we go bishop g4, knight c3 attacking our queen, and then instead of playing queen h5, a normal move, we go bishop takes f3, we just exchange queens and allow white to take the c7 pawn, give us a check and win our free rook, and then we take on c2 with our bishop. So we just finished looking at the bishop f4 line, which everybody plays. Now what if you're playing this line in a classical match or in the tournament and white sees the best continuation pawn to d5? What do? Well, I suggest that you don't resign, you go knight b4, attacking the pawn. I mean, you just want to take back the pawn. If they play the top played move bishop c4, holding on to their pawn, now you go bishop e4, eyeing the undefended pawn on g2 and the e5 pawn. So they'll castle short, but you can go knight c2 here, and there's even a funny line where you can try to play in the way of forcing a repetition with knight a3. I mean, this looks like you want to do a repetition of moves, but the intention is to win the free bishop on c4, you guys. Let's say after white plays rook a1, then you just surprise them and take the free bishop. This will happen most of the times in blitz. And now position is like negative 3.1 in favor of black, so black is clearly winning. Anyways, after knight c2, rook b1 and knight a3, if white doesn't play rook a1 and let's say they take on a3, well, you can just take the rook. Now material is equal. If bishop f4, again trying to rescue their knight, you simply go bishop f5, let's say knight c7. I mean, the game is almost back to normal, which tells you that this combination of moves, bishop f4 and knight c7, doesn't work in almost all the variations. You just go knight to f6. If they play knight b5, you go s6. Now Stockfish thinks black has a slight advantage, and there's absolutely nothing that white can do to get back into the game from here. You are clearly winning, I promise. So that was if white doesn't play bishop f4 but choose to go d5, where you should just keep it so simple. Now we just looked at the bishop c4 line where I said go bishop e4 in order to reach this position, but what if white plays bishop f4 in this position instead of bishop c4? Let's look at that. Let's say after you play knight b4, white plays bishop f4. Again, they want to rescue their knight somehow. Again, you just go knight takes d5, attacking the bishop. They'll play bishop g3, then you go bishop a4. I mean, everything is playable in this position, but you just removed your bishop out of the possible danger. Anyways, pawn to b3, bishop c6. They castle long, pinning your knight to the king. You go king c8 and pinning your knight. They may try bishop c4. You go knight gf6. By the way, white's knight on a8 is still trapped, and there's nothing that white can do to save this knight. It will just take you one move, pawn to b6, to win that pawn knight on a8, and you'll be up a piece. Enough of this, you guys. Let's look at some other main lines. By the way, we can still reach the Nimzowitsch defense, Scandinavian variation, even after white starts with the queen's pawn game. Then we go knight c6, the McKenna's defense, and they rarely play pawn to d5 against the McKenna's defense. You can see in the Leech's database, over 500,000 people choose to go back to e4, and this is when we can go d5, and lo, we are back into the Nimzowitsch defense, Scandinavian variation. Still looking at the exchange variation, e takes d5, where you have to take back with the queen, and again knight to f3. You play bishop g4, but this time after knight c3. You don't take on f3 with the bishop. That is an aggressive line which we just finished looking at. So I want to show you what to do in serious tournaments if you are playing this defense. You go queen h5. So bear in mind that you are not playing for a quick checkmate or quick traps with this line. You are playing for simplification, comfortability, and development of pieces. So this would just be normal. White will play bishop e2, the top plate move, and now you castle long. They do the same, and now it's time to develop your other pieces that are not developed. They play bishop e3, doing the same, and now you want to develop your dark squared bishop. So the only sensible way to do it is to go pawn to e5. That's the key move in the Scandinavian variation. White cannot take you because they will lose their queen. So white's pawn is pinned to the queen. That's why they always go pawn to d5. And this is when you can go pawn to e4, counterattacking. Once again, white cannot take your knight because you will take their queen. So they play knight d4, and this is when you remember to simplify everything. Remember, you are playing for simplification. You take the bishop, queen takes e2. If you want to be a pawn up, you can exchange queens as well and emerge with a clear winning position, you guys. For example, knight f4 is a cheeky move. You want them to take your knight so that you can take the bishop. And now you are just up a pawn. You can continue playing as highlighted. So this is one normal way of playing this Nimzowitsch defense Scandinavian variation. Again, after queen h5, bishop e2, the top plate move, castle long, castle short, and knight to f6. Instead of white playing the top plate move, bishop e3, there are certain times where you are going to see your opponents playing an early pawn to h3. They don't like your light squared bishop sitting on g4, but don't pay attention to pawn to h3, you guys. Just counterattack on d4 with your knight. You keep on simplifying the game. If they take your bishop, that'll be a blunder, you guys, because you are just one move away from mating on h2. So white has to be very careful. And in this line, they may end up losing their queen as well. So that's why you shouldn't be afraid of pawn to h3 and sacrificing your light squared bishop. So once again, after pawn to h3, as long as your rook is indirectly facing the queen, you don't have to be afraid of this. You can just go ahead and take the free pawn on d4, because once again, they can't take your bishop. If they play knight takes d4, just start simplifying the game. And here they can even lose a piece. For example, after pawn to e5, the knight on d4 is pinned to their queen, so this is game over. Alright, so last one. After knight c3, where white attacks your queen, again you go queen h5. There's a line where white delays to castle short. After you castle long, for example, they develop their dark squared bishop first. Maybe they want to castle long, thus delaying to castle short. So you just go knight to f6. If queen d2, that's an indication they want to castle long. You go pawn. By the way, all that I'm showing you guys do actually happen in real games. That's why you should take time to study this opening. It's very simple to play, and at least you are going to avoid many opening traps. So you go pawn to e5. Again, the pawn is pinned to the queen. They play pawn to d5. They can't take your knight, so you just develop your remaining piece. They will castle long, but this is already bad for white because you can just take on d5. So oftentimes, white's d pawn will be a free pawn if you play this correctly. Let's say h3, the top plate move. Well, black is just losing in this line. After knight takes c3, you are attacking their queen. H takes g4, rook takes queen, g takes h5, and now you play an in-between move. Knight takes e2 check, your bishop is defending the rook. So king b1, you take the other rook. Rook takes d1, now you go pawn to a5. In this position, you are up a piece and also up a pawn. So this is clearly winning for you. And this is if white tries to castle long as well. So after you play queen h5 and castle long, if you notice that white is delaying to castle short and plays bishop e3, just remember to start developing all your pieces rapidly. How do you develop your dark squared bishop? By simply playing pawn to e5, not pawn to e6. So remember this pawn break. We saw what happens if white plays queen d2, indicating to castle long immediately. But if they start with pawn to h3 first, again, you don't worry about this pawn on h3, you guys. Just continue playing your cards. You want to develop your dark squared bishop. That's why you play pawn to e5, always in the opening stage. If d5, once again, they can't take your knight, so you just continue simplifying the game. You can play pawn to e4, but that's a little bit risky if you take a look at the position very well. So just simplify the game, you guys. Let's say they unpin their pawn. You can go knight d4. If they take, you go e takes d4. And this may land white into problems where you are indirectly pinning their knight and their queen on e2. So in this position, once again, you are going to win a free piece. And I think this is about everything you needed to know in the queen h5 mainline. Now, this was all in the exchange variation where white trades his e-pawn for the d-pawn. Now, let's look at what to do if white chooses to advance his e-pawn, after we play pawn to d5. But once again, white starts with e4, we go knight c6, the Nimzowitsch defense, they play d4, and then we go d5. So we are only remaining with 2 lines, you guys, the pawn to e5 line and the knight c3 line. So after pawn to e5, which is the advanced variation of the Scandinavian variation in the Nimzowitsch, this is the simplest of all, you guys. By the way, pawn to e5 on move 3 is the top played move. Over 2 million people play pawn to e5, they don't take on d5. So when you see pawn to e5, just think of developing your light squared bishop. It should be out of the pawn chain. So you start with bishop f5 before playing pawn to e6, just like what we do in the Caro-Kann defense. So I'd love to call this the advanced Caro-Kann defense, anyways, not necessary. But if they play the 4th played move bishop d3, by the way, like what they do in the Caro-Kann defense, well, this turns out to be a blunder because that would just lose a free pawn on d4. Yeah, that's just a free pawn. Next, you are going to develop as highlighted and castle long as fast as you can. Your king's knight will most of the times be developed on e7, and you start attacking from the king's side beginning with h5. You will later on play knight g6, whatever. So clearly an early bishop d3 is a very big blunder by white. So white should not play bishop d3. They should play something like knight to f3, which is the top played move. Now this is when you close the pawn chain. At least your bishop is out of the pawn chain. This time if they play bishop d3, you don't have knight takes d4, but you have knight ge7. Yeah, if you want you can trade the bishop right away, but you can take advantage of this attack by defending your bishop with your knight, so that if bishop takes, now your knight is going to sit on the most active square, the juicy f5 square. If pawn to g5, you always have knight h4 supported by your queen. So hopefully they won't take your light squared bishop here. They have to castle short, which is what they do. And now that you know they are not interested in taking your bishop, you can do it yourself. That's just how flexible this opening is. So that you plant your knight on the juicy f5 square. That is a very great square for the knight, you guys. White doesn't even have pawn to g4 here because you can simply play knight h4 supported by your queen, and you will develop your dark squared bishop on e7 and castle short. There's a funny line in this position where white players go pawn to c4. This is a big blunder, you guys. You can see that white's d4 pawn is attacked by 3 of our pieces. Yeah, the queen is indirectly attacking this pawn as well. So after pawn to c4, just go ahead and take the free pawn on d4. If knight takes d4, now you can take the c4 pawn attacking the queen, and you are assured of getting back your piece on the next move. You are going to take this poor knight. Alright, let's go back. So still in the advanced variation where we play bishop f5 before building the pawn chain, and we just looked at what to do against bishop d3 and knight to f3. What if white plays an early pawn to c3? Maybe they were afraid of knight b4. Well, just go ahead with your simple plans. After bishop d3, you can either take right away, or even better, wait for white to take you so that you can place your knight on the juicy f5 square. Let's say after knight e2, now you know that white is not interested to take your bishop, or you can just take their light squared bishop and put your knight on f5, the juicy f5 square once again. But hey, there are many ways of killing a rat. Instead of taking white's light squared bishop, you can also try an early minority attack with a move pawn to f6, which I recommend. If they take your pawn, this will only open up the g file for your king's rook, and there is no immediate way for white to attack your f6 pawn, believe you me. Again, after you play pawn to f6, if they don't take your pawn, and let's say they play pawn to f4, solidifying their center, you just remember to play pawn to h5, just like what we do with pawn to f5. See, you want to put your knight on f5, that's why you play pawn to h5. This will happen, for example, after white castles short, you simplify the game and then place your knight on the juicy f5 square right away. Now you know the importance of the pawn to h5 move that we played to stop pawn to g4, since your f6 pawn is blocking the vision of your queen. So this is just about every important stuff that you needed to know in the advanced variation of the Scandinavian variation. So now let's look at what to do if white doesn't play pawn to e5, and let's say they go knight to c3. So once again, e4, knight c6, d4, and then d5. Then instead of pawn to e5 or e takes d5, white chooses to play knight c3. One move that you should not think about is pawn to e6 because your light squared bishop will be unhappy. In most cases, you want to develop your light squared bishop before playing pawn to e6. So after knight c3, the best you can do is to simplify the game. You take on e4, and see this, you guys, knight takes e4, which is the top played move, turns out to be a very big mistake. For example, knight takes e4, that just loses a free pawn. So there are many ways in which you are going to win free pawns in this variation of the Nimzowitsch defense, which is why I like it so much. From here, you just start simplifying the game, and always remember to castle long after making sure that all your pieces are very safe. There's just nothing to analyze here. Black is winning. Anyways, so after knight c3 and d takes e4, knight takes e4 just loses a free pawn on d4. So that's why you're going to see most of your opponents playing pawn to d5 first, an in-between move. And now you can just go knight e5. The thing is, they want to take on e4. If bishop b5 check, you have bishop d7 blocking the check. You will simplify the game from there. But the main move here is knight takes e4 because they know you can't take their free pawn. It is on d5 now. So you just continue developing knight to f6. See how simple this is. Just like the Tatar variation of the Caro-Kann defense, they play knight takes f6 check, but here you can just play e takes f6. And the position looks good, you guys. There's even a beautiful trap in this line that most of your opponents who like giving unnecessary checks are going to face. For example, bishop b5 check is a mistake because you can just play pawn to c6. You can see the top played move once again is d takes c6, you guys. But you don't take the queen like what most black players do here. The move is queen f5 check, Kaspar's signature move, and that will win the light squared bishop on b5. So hopefully white won't do that. They don't have to play bishop b5 check. They need to play something like knight to f3, after which you can just continue developing your pieces. Remember, in the opening stage, that's what we do. We develop pieces on the most active squares. They'll play bishop e2. You castle short, they castle short. I mean, you're just playing a normal game of chess from here. After pawn to c4, you go rook e8. You are controlling this game. You have all these ideas of developing your light squared bishop. You play pawn to a5. You develop your queen. I can't lose this. Maybe against Magnus, I don't know. But let's look at the last possible line that you may face in the Nimzowitsch defense. Alright, so let's look at the last possible line where black plays the immediate knight to f3. This may happen after they play e4, then we go knight c6, and instead of playing d4, which is the second most played move, they play knight to f3 immediately. Now the simplest that I can recommend to those who want to keep things simple is to go back to e5, and this would just go back to the normal e4 e5 stuff. It's like the game started with e4, then e5, knight f3, and then you play knight c6. This can be good to most of you guys who like the two knights defense. For example, you can just go ahead and play that. But if you just want to keep everything in the spirit of the Nimzowitsch defense Scandinavian variation, you can just go ahead and try d5. Again, if pawn to e5, you know what to do. You just go back to the same stuff that we looked at. And so the top played move that you're going to see is e takes d5. I recommend you take back. After knight c3, there are all sorts of things that black players do in this position, but in my opinion, I would advise to go queen a5. And now you can see this is like the normal Scandinavian defense, now with the knight on c6. So the top played move is pawn to d4, after which I suggest you go bishop g4. You just want to castle long immediately, bishop e2, you castle long, and now white's d4 pawn is overwhelmed. We are about to take the knight and take the free pawn on d4, so they always play bishop e3. You can see that's the top played move, guarding that pawn. But again, you just go knight f6. Developing the knights first is always advantageous. By the way, knight to f6 also enables the upcoming pawn to e5, because if white plays d5, we can just go ahead and take that pawn. So that's why they always castle long, which is a mistake, by the way, because now we have pawn to e5. Remember, we need to develop our dark squared bishop. That's why we always play pawn to e5 as long as our rook is indirectly facing white's queen. So they play pawn to d5, but we can just go ahead and take that free pawn. It's free because white can't do anything. And again, you can see queen c1 is the top played move in the Lichess database. This variation is just full of blunders, you guys. You can go e4, and on the next move, you don't take the knight because white will take your bishop with check. So you first of all take the bishop, and after knight takes e2, Now you begin simplifying the game as usual. Let's say knight c3, attacking your rook. You first of all play an in-between move, bishop takes e3, attacking their queen, and after queen takes e3, you go rook e5, defending your pawn on e4, and next you are ready to play pawn to f5. For example, rook a e1, you go pawn to f5, and here you adjust up a pawn. You should connect your rooks at all times and start playing with your pawns. Don't lose any free pawn. So black is winning in this position. Let's look at another line. So once again, after queen takes d5 and knight c3 attacking our queen, I still recommend to go queen a5, and we just finished looking at what to do after white plays pawn to d4. But what if they play bishop c4, the second most played move? Bishop c4, well, you still go bishop g4, pinning their knight to the queen, and after pawn to h3, you go bishop h5, maintaining the pin, castle short, castle long, that's the idea. Pawn to d3, they are paving way for their dark squared bishop, but you can go knight to f6. Always remember to develop your knights first before pushing pawn to e5. I think it's just advantageous to do it that way. Bishop d2, indirectly attacking your queen, but you can just play queen f5. And look at this, you guys. Pawn to g4 is by far the top played move in the Lichess database, which is a blunder because now you can just sack your knight. And after h takes g4, you don't take with your bishop, but you take with your queen. That's check. King h2, you attack that knight. Once again, that will be a free knight. For example, knight takes d4 doesn't work because white is going to lose his queen. I mean, even if they don't take your knight, let's say they go knight e5, you can still go queen h4 check and white will lose his queen once again. So that's just one beautiful line that you can try out after white plays bishop c4 instead of pawn to d4. Alright, what if white plays bishop b5 in this position instead of bishop c4 or pawn to d4? Well, this is the only case where you don't go bishop g5 but bishop d7. You unpin your knight and obviously they castle short. That's what they do. You can castle long if you want, but just being more solid, go pawn to s6. You don't want to entertain your enemy's pieces in your territory. And after d4, yeah, you would love to castle long, but this is just too dangerous, you guys. White can play pawn to d5, they gain more initiative, you get confused. This is not just good for you. So you become too careful, you play pawn to e6, stopping the possible pawn to d5. And let's say after knight e5, they are attacking your bishop. Well, the best I would recommend is just to go knight to f6. You allow white to take your bishop, make you double up your pawns along the c file. This is good for your eyeballs because now your two pawns are controlling the important d5 square and there's just no way white can reach your c6 pawn. And maybe you have changed your plans. You may castle short given a chance, but if they play queen f3, there's no good way for you to defend the c6 pawn. So just remember to castle your king right here. Your king is very safe, trust me, and at the same time you are protecting your c6 pawn. You are about to enter into the end game, so don't be worried about putting your king on d7. For example, knight e4 doesn't work because you have knight takes e4. You simplify the game, you just want to take it straight into the end game because your king is already active. In the end game, we play with our king. And next, you are going to develop as highlighted. You exchange all the pieces. I mean, look at this beautiful defense around your king. I like this so much. Yeah, so I think now you are good to go. And this is all for today, you guys. If at all you enjoyed watching this video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel if at all you haven't already, because that will encourage me to keep on doing more and more wonderful videos just for you guys. You can also check out my other courses at www.KaspaChess.com, and there you will also be able to sign up for my free masterclass and get yourself one free mini course and the complete version of this study. So until next time, thank you for watching this video once again. Bye bye.